Roguelikes are bad.
Why would you say something so controversial yet so brave?
Is that an extremely broad statement to make? Yes it is. But stay with me for a bit, I promise I'll build to that. And I'll do so by way of reviewing Rogue Legacy 2, because Rogue Legacy 2 is a perfect example of everything fundamentally and inexorably wrong with roguelike video games. To broadly summarize, the core components of what makes Rogue Legacy 2 should, in fact, make for a good video game. It has various classes for you to play, various biomes, aka levels. Biomes are what we called levels before you Zoomers ruined everything. I hate your entire generation, so fuck. Various biomes for you to play through, various enemies for you to murderize, various upgrades you can acquire, and a whole backstory of what happened in the castle and kingdom you keep terra-assing through. I'm sure you hear all of that and it sounds pretty slick. But sadly, taking all those individual quality parts and feeding them into a roguelike makes a video game as much as taking an engine, transmission, drive shaft, steering wheel, some tires, and throwing them all into a big pile makes a car. Put simply, it does not. In both cases, what you end up with is a clumsy pile of junk. Let me start by running down each of those individual constituent parts I just mentioned in a bit more detail. Those parts were classes, upgrades, biomes, adversaries, and story. First, classes. Rogue Legacy 2 has many different classes, from powerhouse classes like Dragonlancer and Barbarian, to nifty gadget classes like Boxer and Cook, to utter garbage classes like Mage and Ranger. And upon the character select screen, where you choose your class, each character can also have different traits that affect how they play in some fashion. Some of these are strong drawbacks, but come with a bonus to gold acquired during a run. These traits, and even what classes are offered, are generated completely randomly. It ultimately means you have many different methods of sojourning through the kingdom available to you. Then there are upgrades. These come in a few forms. First, there are upgrades you get by buying them at your castle. This is how you boost stats and even unlock new classes. You can also find armor and runes during your run to make and equip in between runs. During runs, or possibly randomly at character selection, you can also find relics that will offer some form of boost, or potentially one that kills you on the spot while heavily boosting your gold total thus far. These relics are lost upon death. Then you've got the biomes. Right now there are 5 biomes with what looks like one more slated to be added. Every biome is comprised of an random assortment of rooms with biome-specific enemies littered about. Each biome has a boss, and when you've killed that boss, it's a good time to focus on the next biome. That also about sums up the adversaries, a bunch of little buggers spread throughout rooms, naturally getting meaner and tougher to kill in the later biomes, and also boss fights for every biome. Standard stuff, really. The story is told through the player finding notes or letters or diary entries or the like that shed light on what happened in the kingdom, as they terra-ass throughout the kingdom. Each biome has its particular set of story bits to find, with one letter or note or such being somewhere in the biome each run, until you found them all. The NPCs at the docks, which serve as the upgrade hub, all have some dialogue and basically side stories to read as you speak to them when you pass through. And it's all just fine as a story. Now at this point, you may be thinking to yourself, Redman, you make all that sound pretty good. So what is it about this game that crawled up your ass and died? Well, I'm glad you asked. To sum up, instead of game design, there is a random number generator. To return to the car metaphor from earlier, a car designer will design a car so that the constituent parts of the car, the transmission and engine and so on, all work together to function as a car. Likewise, a competent video game designer will design a video game so that its constituent parts, which in this case are things like the classes, levels, narrative, and just how the character handles, all come together as one quality video game. The Cellar Door devs did not do that in this case. Instead of actually taking the time and effort to design a whole game, like, say, Salt and Sanctuary did, they dumped their pieces of game into a random number generator as if it were a wood chipper, and on the other side got video game salsa. Which sounds delicious, but is really just a poor metaphor for disjointed slop. Let's have some examples. Regarding things like classes, well-designed video games like Mass Effect or Pillars of Eternity or Borderlands 2 or Fallout tightly design many balanced options for starting classes or stat alignments or perks or penalties and the like, and let the player consciously choose from the entire array and build around that. Rogue Legacy 2 just spits out 3 random amalgamations of classes, potential perks, and potential drawbacks. Better just hope you get one with the insanely useful vampirism perk and not one with the totally crippling pacifism drawback. How about upgrades? Rogue Legacy 2 does a better job of this, with actually designing an upgrade tree in the form of a castle you pay to expand with the gold you collect every run. You can also set your armor and runes how you like once you pay to have them made, though actually finding the blueprints for them is largely random. The relics you can get, however, are totally ass random. Well-designed video games like Final Fantasy XI, Borderlands 2, or Monster Hunter tightly design a way for the player to target the loot they want to farm or the equipment they want to build. With Rogue Legacy 2, you better just hope you find a relic that's actually useful instead of the fucking awful one that puts your basic attack on a 2-second cooldown. Why would you ever want that? And it's the same story for level design, though this one really pisses me off. The Dillweed devs actually use the phrase Metroidvania to refer to this game. See, a good Metroidvania, like Metroid, Cave Story, Axiom Verge, or Salt and Sanctuary, will painstakingly and very specifically craft a whole-ass massive game map for you to progress through, backtrack through, and actually explore. Rogue Legacy 2 does the exact opposite. It makes a new map for every run by arranging rooms at complete fucking random, causing you to not so much explore the map as meander through it like a lost chicken. This game is not a Metroidvania, it's a roguelike, which is a massive downgrade from Metroidvania. Calling this blundering mess a Metroidvania is an insult, and it kind of makes me want to challenge Cellar Door to the field of honor. The RNG bullshit being a substitute for actual design is also true of other aspects of the game, but it's less of an issue in relation to them than it is in regards to building your character and the goddamned level design. But substituting a random number generator in place of proper video game design is the fundamental problem at the core of every roguelike, and it's imperative to clearly understand the consequences of such laziness. I should take a moment here to stress the fact that video games are an interactive visual medium of storytelling. To elaborate, a video game uses visuals and interaction with the player in order to tell a story. Visual aspects are important, but there are many other visual mediums. Video games are fairly unique as a medium in how interactive they are. That interactivity is the defining feature of the video game medium. And for there to be meaningful interaction between the game and the player needs to have agency. Without agency, the player isn't interacting with the video game as much as they are being railroaded by it. And Rogue Legacy 2, and indeed all roguelikes by their very nature of being roguelikes, divest the player of their agency in many ways. The most obvious way Rogue Legacy 2 does this is with the random class amalgamations. The player's agency in building a character is removed and replaced with random crap-out combinations of classes and traits. And if the limited choices you're actually offered are a colorblind mage, a ranger that can't see his own health bar, and a dragon knight pacifist, yes, that could actually be a combination of fucking Dragon Slayer that refutes all violence, well then, fuck you. This also disassociates success from skill to a significant extent. Whether or not I may beat a boss becomes a lot less dependent upon my elite gameplay skills and more so on if I blunderously develop an overpowered build largely through blind fucking luck. And while the random character builds might be the most obvious way that Rogue Legacy 2 takes away player agency, the worst way the game does so is probably the level creation. And this is done by every roguelike. In fact, randomizing the bloody map every goddamned run is the defining characteristic of a roguelike. When the map is actually crafted and mostly static, like in good video games, the player can learn it as they make their way through it, adjusting to it, getting used to it, backtracking through it, and generally interacting with it based on their acquired knowledge of it. Shuffling the whole ass game world every time the player tries to enter it, however, takes away all of that and leaves the player perpetually meandering around like an intoxicated wildebeest. The dependence on RNG to render a facsimile of proper video game design also results in terrible pacing for both gameplay progress and the story. Because remember, video games are a medium to tell a story, and good stories are tightly paced. They don't waste hours of fumbling around a random assortment of rooms looking for the boss to get your ass whooped by the boss to repeat that loop several times. Sadly, Rogue Legacy 2 does just that. The player will likely find the 7 or 8 or so story entries without too many more runs than the number of entries. They will then probably spend at least that many runs clearing out all the trash mobs, finding the boss room, getting spanked by the boss, and repeating that until they just get lucky with their overpowered character roll. I'd like to take a moment now to point out what you may have already noticed. For the duration of this video, I have footage from just one run rolling in the background. I did this partly because I thought it would save on editing, but largely to impress upon you how much time is spent on just one run. And this was just my second run of a New Game Plus, and as such was significantly shorter than most runs I undertook towards the end of my first playthrough before New Game Plus. This all results in getting all the story info for a biome in your first few runs into that biome, then hours of repeatedly slogging through garbage enemies trying to find the boss door, then dying to the boss before you finally get that lucky build that lets you beat the boss. Then you finally go to the next biome where you find more story bits and just repeat the same miserable process. This is a common problem in every roguelike I've ever played, and also brings me to my next point. The vapid repetition in these games, holy shit. Listen, repetition in video games isn't necessarily bad. Take Souls-like games, like Dark Souls and Salt and Sanctuary. While I'm not their biggest fan, the repetition in those games usually has some substance. You start at a bonfire or sanctuary or whatever they call the respawn point, you sally forth into combat, you get utterly ass-rammed by something, and you respawn at the respawn point to do it again. But you've learned from it. You learned there's an enemy hiding behind that corner, or that a chest is booby-trapped, or that the game devs hate you, and attempt to adapt to it, and therefore make it a little farther the next time. And when you do find a boss, you get immediately ass-rammed and still know exactly where to find that boss, to go do it again and gradually learn how to beat the boss and proceed beyond it. All of that is literally impossible with not just Rogue Legacy 2, but any roguelike. The entire goddamned map and enemy arrangements change every run, so there's not much to actually learn or adapt to. So the result is, run after run, grinding the same trash mobs in the same rooms, but all laid out different so it takes you forever to find the fucking boss room every bloody time. The repetition is totally hollow, tedious, and downright excruciating when runs take a half hour at a minimum. At best, you can buy a few upgrades each run. upgrades that quickly fall prey to diminishing marginal returns. The end result is a game that feels like 80% filler, just a colossal waste of the player's time with what's basically a hamster wheel until you can beat the boss of a given hamster wheel and move on to the next hamster wheel. All because roguelikes are a shitty, lazy substitute for real game design. Let me conclude by summarizing. Roguelikes are fundamentally bad video games because the lack of fundamental game design inevitably leads them to being a clumsy, poorly placed, frustratingly luck-based, vapidly repetitive mess. One that would always have been a better video game if it was made as a real Metroidvania, or platformer, or side-scrolling shooter, or anything else but a butt-fucking roguelike. The solution to the roguelike question is, naturally, to stop fucking making roguelikes. Every fucking indie dev wants to make a roguelike, probably because it's a lot easier to just have a random number generator make half of your game instead of actually building levels, structuring character progression, or pacing a story by yourself. But these roguelikes are ultimately mediocre cancer. Instead of roguelikes, make real video games for the love of God. Like Fullmetal Furies, another game by Cellar Door, proving to me that they can, in fact, make a good video game instead of a roguelike. By the way, that's Fullmetal Furies. Furies, 1R, not the other thing. As for Rogue Legacy 2, since this was supposed to be a review of that game, I can't recommend it. The only thing really wrong with it is that it's a roguelike, but that's enough to turn what should have been a good game into an irritating mess that isn't worth the time to slog through it. I should thank Rogue Legacy 2, however, as I have played a lot of roguelikes, and I found just about every last one of them hollow and tedious, but I could never really define why. Rogue Legacy 2 was the one that, finally, made me realize the problem was simply that roguelikes are fundamentally, irreparably flawed garbage games. But Redman, I can hear you ask, what if I actually like roguelikes? Should I try Rogue Legacy 2 then? No! You stop that right now, mister. Stop liking what I don't like. Stop liking things that are bad. Half the reason indie devs crank out so many fucking roguelikes is because empty-headed idiots with no standards for what makes a good video game gobble up roguelikes like candy. You like what the Red Man tells you to like, and you like it. Now, the Red Man has said all he has to say on the matter of Rogue Legacy 2 and roguelikes. I'm going to let the rest of the one run I recorded play out because I make it to the boss of the first biome for the first time in New Game Plus. And while I do die fighting the boss,
like a bitch,
this should head off any complaints that I simply need to get good. Skip to the timestamp shown if you want to jump right to the boss fight. I'm the Red Man, thank you for watching, and I'll see you again before too long.